Now, the town of Tombstone is actually here because silver was discovered here back in the late 1870s. And it's been estimated that they got about $85 million worth of silver out of the mines here. And if you put that in today's money, that's $1.9 trillion. Now, we're pulling out onto one of the three main streets of downtown Tombstone during its boom time. Now, this street had a nasty reputation because it was covered with saloons and brothels from one end of the street to the other. And this street got its name because it was said that if you could walk this street from one end to the other without getting shot, stabbed, or beaten real bad, that you were one tough nut. And that's actually the name of the street, Tough Nut Street. Now, along about 1881, the town decided to clean up this street, so some of the lawyers and politicians started buying up the properties to build their homes. And the most famous lawyer we had was a fellow by the name of Allen English. Out the right-hand side, that green trim home is where he lived. Now, he was the best lawyer you could hire here in town, kind of the Perry Mason of his time, never losing a case here in Cochise County. But he also had a second profession here. He was one of the town drunks. And they said that no matter whether he was practicing law or practicing bending his elbow, he was equally proficient in both of his jobs. Coming up on the left-hand side, you're going to see Tombstone Courthouse. Now, it was formerly known as Cochise County Courthouse because at one time Tombstone was the county seat. Now, they built that courthouse in 1882 at a cost of $50,000. That is a state park, and it is the smallest park in the park system. As we ease forward, if you look in the back courtyard, you're going to be able to see the gallows. And that's where they legally hung 7 men here in Tombstone. Now, the population here during the Silver Strike hovered around 20,000. Now, that made Tombstone the second largest city in the West, second only to San Francisco. Now, in order to be counted in the census, you had to be a male, 21 years of age or older, and you had to own property here. And it has been theorized that had they counted women and children back in those days, that the population here may have topped 30,000. Now, we've had some famous marshals here in Tombstone during Tombstone's time. You all know about the Herbs. But we also had a fellow by the name of Texas John Slaughter. Out the right-hand side, you see where he lived while he served as a peace officer here. Out the left-hand side, that brown trim home, that was Dr. Goodfellow's house. And he was the most prominent surgeon here in town. He also was the leading gunshot authority back in those days. And some of the surgical practices that he perfected while he was here in town, in his later years, he went off to universities and taught young medical students. And some of those surgical practices are still being used in emergency rooms and trauma centers throughout the world still to this day. They say that he could actually extract a bullet, stop the bleeding, and have you sewn up in about a minute. Out the left-hand side, that yellow home there, now that's a mystery that is still surrounding Tombstone. Supposedly, at one time, that home was owned by Doc Holliday. Now, some say that he won the deed in the card game, while others say that he purchased the house outright. But we'll never actually be able to know the complete truth on that, because most of the documentation from that time was actually lost in one of the Tombstone fires. But here's what we do know about Doc Holliday while he was here in town. Said he suffered from tuberculosis and was a severe alcoholic. He also kept upwards of 10 rooms rented throughout the city limit, and whenever he would go on a bender, his friends would gather him up and take him to the closest room that he had available. Now, this section of Tombstone on both sides of the trolley was once called Hoptown or Chinatown. It was called that because this is where the local Chinese laborers lived. And there were upwards of 300 Chinese living in Tombstone during the boom time. Now, Hoptown was ruled over with an iron fist by a lady by the name of China Mary. Out the right-hand side, that red home is where she lived. Now, she controlled some of the opium as well as some of the prostitution here in town, both which were legal at the time. She became very rich. She was well respected, well loved here. And when she died, the day of her funeral out at Old Boot Hill, about 2/3 of the town actually closed up their doors so that they could attend the funeral. As we turn the corner, out the right-hand side, you're going to see the OK Corral. Now, if you wanted your horses reshod, you wanted a saddle made, you had leather goods that needed to be repaired, that's where you went and had them done. But folks, that is not where the gunfight took place. The gunfight actually took place in a vacant lot behind the OK Corral, and when it was first reported, it was reported as the incident on Fremont Street. It later got the name changed when a man wrote a book about the gunfight. He changed it to the gunfight at the OK Corral, and the rest is history. That little blue building out the right-hand side, that was present during the gunfight, is a little rooming house. Doc Holliday had one of those rooms rented. As we turn the corner out the right-hand side, you're going to see a tan adobe wall. And that's where the gunfight took place, with the Earps and Doc Holliday standing on Fremont Street. Next to it was Fly's photography. Now, Mr. Fly, he is world famous for his Western photography, but he died penniless in the early 1900s. But now, his glass negatives, they sell for anywhere between $500 and well over $20,000. Out the left-hand side, you're going to see a building called the San Jose. Now, that was the first permanent structure that was erected here at Tombstone. It was a lodging house. Doc Holliday, Pat Masterson, and Wyatt Earp had rooms there from time to time. And at one time, that little lodging house right there was rated the best in the Arizona Territory. We're now moving into a section of Tombstone that was once called Miner Town. Now, it was called that because this is where about 70 to 80% of the English-speaking miners live. Now, most of the miners lived in tents, though some did build homes while they were here. Out the left-hand side, that number 11 is pretty accurate as to what they used to look like. Now, that one has been added onto the back over the years, but those not very wide, not very long homes, they were called shotgun houses. The reason they were called that is because you could open up the front door, open up the rear door, fire a gun through it, and not hit anything. They were basically just four walls and a roof. Coming up on the right-hand side, you're going to see a little short walkway. Well, down that walkway, the second building on the left is the first church that was built here in Tombstone. Now, they still hold some of their church services on in that building still to this day. The lady that was responsible for having that church built was named Nellie Cashman. And she's not only responsible for that church, but she's responsible for upwards of 300 churches being built throughout the West and down into Old Mexico. Out the right-hand side in the distance out there, you see the Dragoon Mountains. Now, that is where both Cochise and Geronimo strongholds were. They could see the buffalo soldiers coming from miles and decide whether to fight or whether to run. I don't know if I've got any John Wayne fans on here, but if you are a John Wayne fan, I am sure you have seen his movie McClintock. What a lot of folks don't know is that part of that movie was actually filmed here in Tombstone. And while it was being filmed here, he and Maureen O'Hara stayed down in the Tombstone Sagebrush Inn. Now, Mr. Wayne, he fell in love with Tombstone while he was here, and whenever he was back in the area making movies, he'd always come back to town and stay for a while. Well, if you know about Mr. Wayne, you know that he loved the barbecue. Well, he stayed there in the inn so often, they actually built a barbecue pit for him to use whenever he was here in town. And if you were lucky enough to be staying in the inn while he was there, he would feed you and your entire family free of charge. Out the left-hand side, you're going to see St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Now, they built that church in 1882. A few things about that church. You notice the stained glass windows in there. They were imported from Italy, and those are the original windows that were installed in 1882. Also, that is the oldest Episcopal church in the state of Arizona. Now, that church was built entirely from donations, and Wyatt Earp was one of the major contributors. Now, if you're a ghost fan and you like ghost stories, once we cross over the intersection here, out the left-hand side, you're going to notice a rather large yellow home. Now, supposedly, that is one of the most haunted houses in America. It's called the Buford House. And they say that at times you may be able to take photos of that house, and when you look at them at a later date, you may be able to pick out anomalies or images standing on the porch or appearing out the windows. Now, it's been featured on the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, National Geographic, Ghost TV, and it's had dozens and dozens of articles written about it in newspapers and magazines. Now, this section of Tombstone back in the 1880s was covered with houses, much as it still is today. But there is one that I do want to point out to you here at the end of the block. It's now one of our local businesses. This purple trim building out the right-hand side is where Morgan Earp lived up until the day he was murdered here in Tombstone. Go out to Old Boo Hill and make a U-turn. This is the original Boo Hill.